Hi, this is Cheryl McQueen, designer with Bello's Designs. Today we will be playing with grunge backgrounds with bubbles. This is inspired by Michelle with the Creative Cove. Michelle mostly uses acrylic paint for her creations and creates textures with paper for her background, but I decided to try a twist on her inspiration and use distress inks for my project. So let's take a look at the supplies that we're going to be using today. We will be using a multifarious smooth and supreme cardstock. I have cut this one to be 6.5 inches by 4.5 inches. We'll also have a border around the edge cardstock, and I have cut a piece of cardstock to be 6 3/4 inches by 4 3/4 inches. And then for our card base, I just took a piece of cardstock, cut that to be 10 inches by 7 inches, and then folded that in half. For our stamps today, we're going to use the Ginger stamp by Lavinia. This one is LAV 799. We'll also use the Lavinia Vine Branch. This one is LAV 811. And then I just have a few extra little stamps, some grunge stamps that I have on hand, and some word stamps that will kind of add to our background just a little bit. For the inks today, I'm going to be using distress inks, and what I'm using is going to be the brushed Corduroy, Pumice Stone, Walnut Stain, Bundled Sage, Rustic Wilderness, and Iced Spruce. For our ink that we're going to be using to stamp the basic designs down, I'm going to use the VersaFine Clair Nocturne. We're also going to use just a little bit of a white acrylic paint. Doesn't matter what kind it is, it's just for adding a little bit of reflection into our bubbles. We're going to use Lavinia masking sheets. I've used these quite often. The reason that I want to do that is that when I do my owl, I want the bubbles to appear that they're behind him. So I want to make sure that it looks like they are behind him and give a little bit of dimension to it. Also, we will be using the stamping platform. I like to use a stamping platform with a sticky grid on it. That way I don't have to worry about using magnets. You'll want to have some blending brushes on hand, and as well as having a couple of paint brushes that we will use with our project. Have a spray bottle of water. This will help us to mix some of our cover colors and make our bubbles look softer. To create the bubbles, you'll want to have some kind of round things. I use some pill bottles. You can use the top of, like if you've got distress ink, take the top off of this and just use that to create some smaller bubbles. Just anything that you've got that will help you to create the circle of your bubbles there. You'll also need to have something to put your card together with. I like to use the adhesive tape, but a paper glue will work just fine as well. I'll go ahead and show you. This was one that I created when I first tried working with this background technique, and so you can kind of see the fun things that you can do with this. I decided to use the greens and make it look a little bit more like the trees and give a little bit lighter color for this particular project, but you can use any colors that you like. All right, so let's get started working on our project. Before we get started, I will tell you that it's a very windy day here in Texas today, so I'm hoping that we don't pick up the sounds of the wind blowing outside on the camera. But anyway, just wanted to let you know, if you hear a little bit of a swooshing sound, that's what's going on today. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to start out by creating our background. And we're going to use the smooshing technique, as I call it. I don't know if it has an official name or not, but I'm going to scoot over my platform here, my working surface a little bit. Let me move the inks out of the way so I don't knock them onto the floor. And so we've got just, you can see a little bit of my work surface. So we're going to take our piece of art card, the multifarious, And what we're going to do is we're just going to start out by taking some of our lighter colors first. So let's start with Bundled Sage. And we're going to need our spray bottle as well. So let's see, Bundled Sage, here we go. And I'm just going to take this and just smush some down onto my work surface here. And then I'm going to spray it with some water. And then all you're going to do is just take your card, scoot that over just a little bit more so that you can see, and just start smooshing and swiping your card around in the ink. Now if you'd like to, you can dry in between your little smooshing time so that you don't get it to where it just wipes off because it's wet. It gives you a little bit of a really unique looking texture. Add a little bit more ink. Now get it really wet this time, see if we can't get some really cool looking smooshes and colors as we're rubbing around. Get a little bit lighter. And I might dot up some of my little things to give a variation also. Quick little dry. And maybe one more little bit of smooshing around. And if you want to, you can kind of move your colors around with your finger as well. Gives you a different look. And you can even take your ink on your finger and slide it around as well too, just to get some different looks. Alright, so now let's go ahead and move on to our iced spruce. So we'll take the iced spruce, do the exact same thing. Put some color down, get it wet, and dab and smoosh. Okay, and now let's see if we can't start adding some of our little bit darker colors. We're going to go with our brushed corduroy and add just a little bit of an interest in the color differences by adding the tans and browns in. And so as you can see, we're really starting to get our nice, cool looking grunge background. Let's go ahead and add a little bit of walnut sage. I think I said walnut sage, it's actually walnut stain. Get a little bit more, some darker spots into this. And then for just a little bit of more green, let's go ahead and use some of the Rustic Wilderness. This will add just a little bit of brightness, as this color is a little bit brighter. So basically, just smoosh and wipe and do whatever you want to do until you get your background to look how you like it to look. I'm going to add a little bit more green. Maybe lighten it up just a little bit with some more water. Get it to spread a little bit more. All right, we'll go ahead and dry this up just a little bit before we go to what I kind of call my secret weapon, I guess, because this background really looks cool. I mean, you've got some really great grunge looking there, but to me, it's a little bit disjointed. And the way that I like to make it all seem to flow together is to take one of my lighter colors. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and use the bundled sage and my blending brush. And so what I'm going to do is take that and just blend it over the entire surface of my card. And what this does is it just kind of makes all the colors look like they belong together. It just adds a little cohesiveness because this one light color is actually across the entire surface of our card. So now you can kind of see that it actually softens it a little bit and makes it just look like they all go together. So hopefully you can kind of see how that helps to bring all the colors. All right, now we'll go ahead and do just one little quick drying just to make sure that it's dry enough for us to go ahead and start working with our stamps. So I'm going to go ahead and put some of these aside, out of the way for the moment. And actually, I didn't do any pumice stone. We could actually even go back in and just add a little bit of that if you want just a little bit of color, either with the smooshing technique or with a little bit of blending. This just gives a little bit more of a, it's almost a grayish tan color. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and get my stamping platform out, and we will go ahead and stamp our images on, and I'll show you how we use the Lavinia masking sheet to mask out our images so that we can put our bubbles in. All right, so now I'm going to take my stamping platform, and I will also go ahead and just move this back over a little bit so I've got a little more working space. And I am going to, let me move a couple more items here. There we go. I'm just going to take my card, mount it onto my stamping platform. I'm going to zoom this out just a little bit so you can see it just a little better. And then we're going to take our ginger stamp and just position her down here. Kind of get her centered there. and ink up our stamp with the VersaFine Clear and get that stamped on there. Then we will go ahead and move on to stamping our branches with the vine on the top and for a branch for her to stand on. Okay, so now we've got our ginger and our branch and our border branches on to our cardstock, and we're ready to move on to masking out ginger and the main branch so that we can create our bubbles. Okay, so let's go ahead and work with our Lavinia masking paper. So if you've never used these before, it has a paper top and a plastic protective sheet. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our stamps, and I'm going to go ahead and just put this back onto the stamping platform. You don't have to get a really good perfect image when you're doing this, just enough so that you can see your stamp. So we're going to put this down. And I'm going to stamp, ink it up. Like I said, it doesn't have to be real great, just enough so that you can see where you want to cut. And then we'll do the same thing with our branch. Get a little more ink on that just so I make sure I've got a good place to see where I'm going to cut it out. Alright, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut these out. I will do that off camera so you don't have to watch me. But what I'm going to do is, you can see where it's got these little pieces of feather and little pieces of vine and stuff that are around the edges. We don't need to keep that part. When we cut this out, we're just going to cut the basic shape. It doesn't matter about the little feathery parts there. So you'll see that when I come back and show you what I have cut out. Okay, so now let me move our stamping platform out of the way. Now I have got my pieces cut out. And hopefully you can kind of see what I was talking about. This is a little bit not clear. I tell you what, let me see if I can change the lighting just a bit so you can see that a little bit better, maybe. So I left off the little pieces of the, pick up this stamp and maybe you can see it. The feathers here, I just cut those off. We don't need those. We don't need to worry about that. So now I've got my basic piece of ginger, and I'm going to peel it off of that base. You can keep the base if you'd like, if you want to try and reuse your mask at any point in time for another project. It will usually last for a time or two, depending on what kind of project you do and how well the stickiness has stayed. All right, so we'll put that down, and because this has got kind of a damp start to it, it doesn't stick quite as well, but that's okay. We can still work around that. I might even actually use just a tiny little piece of some low-tack masking tape just to keep it in place to make sure we don't have any problems. And then we'll take our branch and do the same thing. Just mask out. And this is not having to be perfect, but it's just enough to be able to do our bubbles and not have them go into, well, I'm having trouble with this one, sorry. Go over our other pieces of the project. Now I've got my nice stickies all sticking together here. All right, so let's get our piece laid on here. Actually, I've got that down just a little far. All right, so basically it's just to make sure that when we do our bubbles, we don't have to worry too much about the bubbles looking like they're in the wrong place. And since I'm not going to do a whole lot of bubble right here, I'm going to just cover up that tiny little piece. All right, so now we've got our masking sheets down, and we're going to start doing our bubbles. So I'm going to take my several little things here that I've got to create the round bubbles, and I'm going to use my walnut stain, and I'm going to use my Rustic Wilderness. And basically what you're going to do is you want to make sure you're using a water-based ink, because you're going to need to get it to kind of flow a little bit. If you use a permanent ink, then it won't do the smoothing out and the softening of the edges. So what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of rub that in there, lay it on the card, and get our bubble started there. We'll go ahead and do one down here, and maybe one up here, kind of going off the top of our card. And then let's go ahead and put a few smaller bubbles in. And I'll put a smaller bubble down here. All right, and then I'm going to move on and do a few in my Rustic Wilderness. So I'm going to take my paper towel and just kind of dry those off just a little bit. Then using my Rustic Wilderness, I'm going to create a few bubbles in the green. Maybe overlap a few of the bubbles. Kind of give it that look of some depth. Maybe overlap this one just a little bit as well. Okay, so now when you've got all the bubbles on there that you like, and I may go ahead and do one more just right around here. You got all of your bubbles down. Now we can go ahead and remove our masks. And as you can see, now the bubbles look like they're behind our main objects. And then at this point, what we want to do is take a paintbrush and a little bit of water. We're going to spritz some water down here. And what we're going to do is start softening out the edges of those bubbles and dragging some of that ink color down into the bubble. So if you can see there, while I'm doing this brushing over the edge, it softens out the way the edge of the bubble looks, and then I can pull some of that color down. So I'm going to go now and do all of the softening, and then I'll come back and show you how we add some color. Alright, so let me kind of show you again with these last couple of bubbles that I'm taking my brush and just rubbing it across that edge to soften it. And then I'm going to take some of that color and drag it down into the bubble. So this gives it a little bit of dimensionality as well. I'll show you again on this piece, on this bubble. So we'll take it, our brush. It's a little easier, I think, to see maybe with the brown, how it softens that edge of that bubble up. And as it does that, it kind of gives you the chance to just pull down a little bit and start bringing some of that brown in. Now, to get some more color in it, we'll go ahead and get our walnut stain, add a little bit down on our work surface, and add some water. And now this, just start giving it a little bit of color and a little bit of dimension, just by taking a little bit of that ink and dragging it around the edges. So that now gives your bubble some shape, makes it look a little bit less flat. And the cool thing too is that you get a little bit of your background colors to start kind of smoothing out and rounding and picking up and adding some more color as well. It's kind of a cool thing to do. That's the nice thing about the distress inks, is that you can change the effects of them by just adding some water. So I'm going to take a little bit more on this brown. And start dragging some color in. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and go on. You can kind of watch me as I just try and add just a little bit of color to the bubbles. Give them a little bit of shape and dimension. Okay, so now you can see that that has added some dimensionality to our bubbles. So now we're ready to go ahead and put in some of our coloring on the branches and our owl, and then do some background elements. So I'm going to clean up my work surface just a little bit to give me some room here before we move on. Don't want to get this all over our project. And at this point, you can choose whether you would like to use the inks to paint in, which is what I had originally thought that I might like to do, or you can do something like art markers. And I think I'm going to go ahead and do the art markers to color in my owl and the branches. So what I'm going to do is just basically start putting in a lighter color over the surface, and then adding a few darker colors to help bring out the owl. Our background is also going to kind of help a little bit with the coloring on that. So let's just start out by taking a very light art marker and starting to color in, and then you'll see that I will build the colors up as we go along. All right, so as you can see, we just played around a little bit with the colors. You can choose whatever colors you like. I decided to go with something that was a little bit more muted tone for this particular one, just because I don't want him to be so stark. But anyway, so now we've kind of got that look going that we want for our project here. So at this point, I'd kind of like to go ahead and add in some background grunge type things. So we will move on to using our grunge stamps and our word stamps to try and add just a little bit of excitement to the background there. Okay, so I have a couple of stamps here. This one has some different words on it, and then this is some grunge stamps. So I'm just going to take some of these stamps, a couple of them out, and we're just going to play around with them a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm not actually going to mount these on anything. I want to keep them flexible so that I can kind of wishy-washy my shapes in there. I don't know if that makes sense, but hopefully as we go along you can kind of see that. So we're going to start out with the words. And basically what I'm going to do is just kind of dip it around into my ink and then just splotch. Just splotch some of the words around. Like I said, what I don't really want is to have it to all be exactly the same shape. So that's why I'm just kind of splotching it around with my stamp instead of putting it onto an acrylic board or the stamping platform. All right, so now we've got a few little splotches of words in there. And then we'll just go ahead and do a few tiny bits of the grungy stamps as well, just to give a little bit of grunge texture in there. And maybe a little bit with this one. Maybe one down here. Don't want to go too overboard with our grunging up there, but that just gives it a little bit more interest. All right, and so now we are getting pretty close to finishing our card up. One of the things that I like to do is I like to add, when I'm doing especially something that looks distressed or grungy, is add a little bit of a distressed border around the edge. This kind of frames your piece, and it also makes it pull the eye to the center of your project. So what I'm going to do is, this is the walnut stain, and I'm going to take my little dauber. And I'm just going to dip it in that, and I'm just going to start going around the edge, kind of in circles, just to create a little bit of this kind of a grungy, framey edge here. So there we go. That just kind of gives it that really nice finished look to me. All right, and so at this point in time, we are ready to go ahead and put our card together. I'm going to move some of these things out of the way, and I'm going to grab my frame. This is my frame piece of cardstock, and we're going to mount that like that. Now, I do have a little bit of ink on my hands, so before I do that, I want to go ahead and make sure that I'm not smearing anything all over my project with inky fingers. I know that's probably happened to you before, so I always try to be conscious of that, because the last thing I want to do is mess up my project that I've worked so hard on. All right, so I'm going to turn this face down. And just use my adhesive tape here. And now let's get it centered onto our frame piece. And then we will take our card base, do the same process. Get this and center it. Onto our piece of cardstock. And there we have our finished project. So I realized after I finished up this card that I left out one step that I like to do, so I hope this doesn't make it a little too disjointed for you. I will try and place this where it's supposed to be here in the video, but I do like to add just a little bit of white to our bubbles to give some highlight and more shape to the realism of the bubble. So I'm sorry that I left that out earlier. So let's go ahead and add that in. I take a little bit of just white acrylic paint. This is just a little tube. You can use this one or you can use whatever you have on hand. And then I'm going to use just a little bit of water. And I'm going to take my brush and just add some highlights to our bubbles. Now, one of the things that you may wonder is why I'm using the acrylic paint instead of using an ink. The inks I found, I just cannot find a white ink that I really like that's going to show up and not fade into the ink that's already on there. So if you take the acrylic paint and use it instead, then it will kind of sit on top of your card and give the effect that you're looking for, without just completely disappearing as the inks will do. So all I'm doing is just getting my brush wet and then just adding a little bit of white highlight. And you can do it light or dark, however you prefer to do, just enough to kind of get that impression. And if you add a little water, then it softens it up. You can do that at the bottom and kind of draw the paint down just a little bit. So I'm just going to just give a little bit of that white in there. Don't have to use a whole lot, just enough to give it that reflection that you usually get with bubbles of the light. Alright, so there you can kind of see that we got a little bit of the highlights in there to show the shape of the bubble a little bit better. Again, sorry that I left that out on the first part before we finished the card up, but this just gives you an idea of how it looks when we add in our reflections. Thank you so much for watching my video tutorial today. This is kind of a fun grunge background to create, and the bubbles add such a fun effect to it. I want to thank Michelle of the Creative Cove for her inspiration. I love her work and enjoy seeing what kinds of variation I can create on her style. I hope you give this project a try. Have a great day.